I thought it was normal to travel by boat during moonlight hours. My dad said, you know, Bobby's going to be picking us up and we're going to go by boat across the bay to the Kenedy Ranch. We're going to go on your first hunt. And I kept thinking, why do I have these toe sacks on my feet? You know, we're walking really far. I have to be quiet, I can't talk to him, but I'm trying to keep up as best as I can until, you know, it gets daylight, and he said he's gonna start rattling up us deer. I grew up in South Texas, in Rivera, Texas, right on Baffin Bay. Known for trophy trout and trophy deer. My dad worked rotation, so we could live anywhere. We always kind of wondered why we lived in South Texas in the middle of nowhere, but then I later learned about all the trophy hunting that went down in South Texas, and so it all makes sense now.
So you grew up in the country?
Oh yeah, very rural. I graduated with 42 people, if that tells you about the size of Rivera, Texas, just south of Keensville, Texas.
How far were you from the King Ranch?
Oh, it was in our backyard. You know, it was just a stone's throw away, only about a 13-minute drive, if that. In the Kenedy Ranch, we could see it right across the bay. So that was just also probably a 15-minute boat ride, 20 minutes at most.
What did life look like growing up there as a little girl?
I spent a lot of time in the country, a lot of time hunting, a lot of time fishing. You know, locals would know me as the girl that rode the bicycle with a 5-gallon bucket and the fishing pole laid across it. Every day after school, I would go fishing, and so I'd ride my bike down to the local boat ramp and do some fishing. We lived on the bay there in Baffin Bay area, so it was real easy for me to go down there. As I got older, a lot of parties and fields. That again, not a lot to do, you know, mainly we did a lot of bird hunting, a lot of deer hunting, and just really spent a lot of time outdoors.
Can you recall one of your first hunts with your father and tell me about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I thought it was normal to travel by boat, you know, during moonlight hours. And so I remember one of my dad's really good friends, Bobby Woodville. My dad said, you know, Bobby's going to be picking us up. It's going to be about 1 a.m., 2 o'clock in the morning, and we're going to go by boat across the bay to the Kenedy Ranch. And we're going to go on your first hunt there. So he made me do a lot of target practice because he was very adamant about being the perfect skilled shot. And so my dad always took the right number of bullets with him hunting. So if he thought that he was going to shoot 2 deer, he would only take 2 bullets. If he was going to shoot 4 deer, he was going to take 4 bullets. And so he was very good about saying, if you don't break its neck on the first try, you know, we have no more bullets, you know, so we're only taking 2. And I remember Bobby dropped us off on the bay, and I was probably 10, 11, somewhere in that time frame. And my dad was a very tall guy, and all I could see was his head bobbling around in the moonlight, and I kept thinking, why do I have these toe sacks on my feet? It's very hard to walk. You know, we're walking really far. I have to be quiet, I can't talk to him, but I'm trying to keep up as best as I can until, you know, it gets daylight, and he said he's going to start rattling up us deer, and whenever I see one and he tells me to shoot, you know, that's whenever I have the go-ahead to shoot. So we went over to, like I said, it was not super cold that day. We wore jackets and layers going out there, but then it started to warm up, you know, in the morning, and kind of mid-morning we end up seeing a buck walk out in the opening, and my dad said, there you go, you better take your chance. And so I shot it, broke its neck on the first try, it fell down. My dad was so proud, but we went over, and it was pretty small, 7-pointer. I have it here today, actually, and but it was a little bit of a 7. It was real small, and he told me, he was like, well, he's like, good job. He's like, I'm glad you broke its neck. He was like, but we're going to try to find one bigger. He's like, that one was okay. And so we continued to hunt in that day, and then we saw what looked like a 15-pointer. And so he let me shoot at that one, shot it, broke its neck, fell to the ground, and he was super proud of that one. That one actually had 2 kicker points, you know, 2 kickers off of the side. So he was like, wow, that's a really good deer, good job. And so now we had to wait for Bobby to come pick us up. And I was like, what are we going to do the rest of the day? You know, because Bobby wasn't picking us up till the middle of the night the next day. So my dad said we would find an oak tree and take a nap. Have a few little snacks, but we couldn't talk to each other a lot. And so I remember it got a little hot and I was getting bored because I couldn't talk. And that's a funny story. My dad was not much of a talker. Anyways, but while we waited for Bobby Woodall to come and pick us up, we ran into a group of hogs that had a litter of babies. And my dad, we had a pig farm growing up. We had about 480 pigs at our house growing up. We raised show pigs for major livestock shows. And so he had a love for pigs. And so my dad decided that he was going to catch a couple of those babies and bring him home. And he did. He caught 2 piglets, very tiny piglets. And he made me carry those piglets in my jacket. He carried the 2 deer that I shot strapped on his back. And I had to carry these 2 piglets underneath my jacket the whole time. And he told me, you better keep them quiet. Don't let them squeal. Don't let them scream. He was like, just keep them quiet. And they were not quiet. And so I thought for sure, you know, he was going to be very disappointed or we were going to miss our ride. And we weren't going to get picked up because I was trying so hard to keep those pigs quiet underneath my jacket.
Were those piglets trying to bite you or anything?
No, they just wanted their mama, so they were just like squealing, you know, and I was trying to keep them like right under my arms, and then I'd keep their little noses together with each other thinking, well, maybe you need each other. So I was constantly, you know, moving them around underneath my camo jacket. I carried those pigs all the way out, and I have a picture of him actually feeding those pigs, and I'd have to wake up every 2.5 hours to feed those little piglets, which ended up being wild pigs, and we kept them for a long time. But yeah, that was my first hunting trip with my dad. Quite the experience.
How old were you?
I think I was about 10, 11. Right about that age was my first poaching. You know, at the time I didn't know I was poaching. But yeah, that was my first trip to the Kenedy Ranch, uninvited.
So it was in the 90s, like 95?
Gosh, it might even have been like 1989. I feel like it might have been late 80s because it was in the Texas Trophy Hunter magazine. My dad had published that I'd shot my first deer. That's a whole nother story for a different day.
Wow. Is that a long one or?
No, I mean, it could be a short one. You know.
Free to take your time.
Yeah, the Texas Trophy Hunter magazine would always have, you know, the youth section about the kids that shot their deer, and Dad had my picture put in there and a little description about where I shot it and how I shot it. And so I remember when the magazine came in the mail, he told me he submitted it to Texas Trophy Hunter, and when the magazine came in the mail, he was like, we got the magazine. He was like, you're in it. And so I go over there and I sit on the couch and I'm flipping through and I get to my picture and I'm looking at the description below, and it says outfitter, and it says DOS. And I had no idea what DOS stood for. And so I looked at my dad and I was like, what is DOS as the outfitter? And he's like, Dad's Outlaw Service, duh. And so I just absolutely couldn't believe that he published that. And it was published in the Texas Trophy Hunter magazine that it was Dad's Outlaw Service was my outfitter that took me hunting. He was quite a jokester. He had a lot of wit about him and loved to play little jokes like that.
Was this the same deer you just told me about?
Yeah, it was one of the two that I shot that same day. So he considers both of those being my first deer because he said the 7-pointer really wasn't quality. And so he wanted me to shoot a bigger one while we were out there.
Yeah. What would an outdoorsman who knew your father say about him? How would they describe him?
Well, you've probably heard Charlie describe him as the king of poachers. I think somebody asked Charlie why he was called the prince of poachers and not the king of poachers in one of his podcasts, and he said because the king is dead. My dad never really got caught you know, he did get caught one time, and we can get into that story about how he got caught. But there were a lot of game wardens, and there was a bounty out for him, and you know, as I got older, and so he was very good at what he did, and he studied a lot of the maps. He made friends with people that had access to the maps to all these massive ranches, and we had these maps at our home, and it would show where guard gates were, where every entry, every exit was, and so he would study before he would go out there, and so you know, he was more of a legend in the area for his deer hunting skills. Even got a job one time because his boss said, "I'm going to hire you for this job only if you promise to take me hunting on the King Ranch." He ended up taking his boss hunting on the King Ranch. They poached, he had a Bronco too at that time, and they ended up hitting a gate, and my dad broke a tail light. Well, they ended up finding a piece of the tail light, and they drove, the game wardens drove all around Keensville, Texas, trying to figure out if anybody ended up coming in the body shop to repair a tail light. And they ended up tracking my dad down. The car actually was still at the body shop with the broken tail light. His boss's wallet was inside the car, and so they actually went straight to the boss. And the boss threw my dad under the bus and said, "Oh, no, 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 I wasn't the driver. It's not my car. You know, I wasn't the driver of the car, just my wallet was in there." And so my dad ended up getting fired, and he got banned from the King Ranch at that time as well. But they couldn't really place him in the car, so he didn't really get caught. You know, he did have to pay a fine for being out there, a trespassing fine, so it really wasn't a poaching fine because there was no evidence that, there was no hard evidence that they had actually shot a deer and taken a deer at that time.
Wow. Have you gone hunting with your father a lot?
We did a lot of bird hunting together. He was really particular about taking his kids poaching, and so I think that, you know, he knew that he probably had a moral issue behind that, but also it was the thrill of it, and he didn't want to get his kids arrested or get his kids involved, and so, but we were involved because I dropped him off. I made his runs, you know. As soon as I was 12, I was starting to drop my dad off. My mom became legally blind, and so my mom couldn't drive us anymore. And so my mom would ride in the car, and she'd make sure that, you know, I followed directions okay. But yeah, as early as 12 years old, I was dropping my dad off on ranches, all the way down to the valley from, you know, I mean, they'd be 4-hour drives. But, you know, he'd give me all the directions of how to drop him off, how to pick him up. And yeah, I just thought it was normal. It was a way of living. It's how we grew up.
Is there a crazy story about your father that you like to tell, maybe where everything went terribly wrong?
Yeah, it was probably, you know, probably his worst hunting trip ever, you know, was the day that he got caught. My mom dropped him off. I was in the car. I was still really young, and so my mom was still driving at that time, and so my mom went to drop him off, and whenever she dropped him off, my dad was very adamant about not hitting the brakes more than twice. Don't hit the brakes more than 2 or 3 times, and if you do, you keep driving and you go. You know, and so my mom during this hunt, she dropped him off, but she had to hit the brakes because she had to make a U-turn. And so actually a border patrol was watching and saw my dad jump the fence and assumed that my dad was an illegal immigrant, you know, just jumping the fence, and somebody had dropped off an illegal immigrant. And the border patrol ends up going up and then jumping the fence. And my dad saw the border patrol lights pull up, and so he ended up hiding his backpack, he hid his gun, and he just laid on the ground and waited. And so border patrol jumped the fence. My dad gets up and he runs, and the border patrol ends up tackling him down and taking him in. And my mom had no idea all this was going on. You know, she's just driving her kids home in the car, no big deal, just another day in the Moore household. And so it wasn't until the end of the day, the next day, because, you know, he'd get dropped off in the middle of the night sometime, that he ended up going to the Sarita Police Department. They booked him there, right at the Sarita checkpoint area. And the Border Patrol ended up arresting him. They ended up calling the game warden and letting them know. And so my dad was always very prideful that even though that was a bad day, he was very prideful in the fact that a Border Patrol arrested him and it was never the game warden. And so he will still claim to this day, if he was still alive, that he never got busted by the game wardens. You know, it was just the Border Patrol that ended up thinking he was an illegal immigrant. And so because he hid his gun and he hid his pack, they never could charge him with anything more than trespassing. Because he hid all of his stuff. So they just, you know, he's dressed in camo and they only got him, but not in the act of hunting. They ended up prosecuting him very hard because they knew his name. And so he was not a stranger, you know, to the Clayburgh, Kennedy County area. And so they ended up hitting him really hard with a lot of fines, and probably the worst fines that you can get for trespassing that you could imagine, but they really couldn't charge him with poaching at that time. And that's the one and only time that he ever got caught, and probably the worst day. And I think our orders for don't tap the brakes, don't turn around, and those things got way stricter as the time went on, you know, and how he ingressed and egressed some of these ranches definitely got stricter along the way.
Can you talk to me about your first time taking him from beginning to end, please?
God, the first time I took my dad hunting, I was so stressed out. I mean, I couldn't have been more than 12 years old. That's very young to be driving. I started driving young because of my mom's blindness. And by that time, she was absolutely night blind first. And so I remember thinking, I'm not going to get it right. What if I kind of run off the road? Some of these roads they didn't even have painted lines. You know, they were very tiny back roads. And so as a kid, I felt like, I needed the lines to keep me honest. And, you know, then he told me I was going to drop him off. But I don't think the drop off was as stressful as the pickup. You know, how was I going to know that I picked him up at the right time, at the right place, and I didn't tap the brakes the wrong amount of times? And so my dad would take an old oily rag, you know, a used rag. It couldn't be a new rag, but he would take an old rag, like a shop towel, and he would throw it in the middle of the road, and he'd be like, okay, I'm going to throw the rag in the middle of the road, and you drive exactly 1 mile or 2 miles or 3 miles. It changed, you know, each time. And so he'd throw that rag in the road, and I have to zero the odometer and make sure that I drove that exact mileage. And how he ever knew the exact mileage, you know, technology's changed a lot since then. So I never could figure out, you know, how he was in the exact spot every time. And so I had to pull over, and I couldn't pull over for more than an allotted amount of seconds. And I had to wait to hear a thud in the back of the truck. And if I didn't hear the thud in the back of the truck, then I knew that, you know, he wasn't quite there yet. So the first time I picked him up was extremely stressful. And so we did it. I picked him up, we made it, and, you know, he probably was like, atta girl, now I have somebody I can depend on to do my drop-offs and my pickups. That reminds me, we would vacation a lot at the Frio River in Concan. And one time I had a real bad stomach ache, and I drove my dad's truck after a dance. And he always had rags, like that was his thing. It was the weirdest thing, but he had rags everywhere, in the side of his door, you know, in the console, everywhere. And so I got a really bad stomach ache, and we had to open 2 gates to get to our cabin that we were staying at. And so I'm sweating, and I'm like, I gotta poop. Like, there's no way, I can't hold this in. And so I got my dad's rag, and I ran out into the field. I left the truck parked in the road, and I ran out into the field, and it was the worst stomach ache of my life. I mean, I still sweat thinking about it. And anyways, he had those rags in the door, so I used those rags, and I left him on the side of the road. But like, not right in the side of the road by the gate. I mean, I put him down the road. And anyways, the next day, we're all traveling as a family to go eat lunch. And Dad's like driving down the road, and he looks over and he's like, why are my rags, those look like my rags. How do my rags get outside the truck? And so he puts the truck in park and gets out of the truck, and I'm like, Dad, don't, you got to stop. And so my mom's like, what's going on? Like, what's the big urgency? And I was like, Mom, he can't go get the rags. And so he's like walking out there, and I'm like, no, Dad, I had to poop. And so, yeah, we always have this running joke about the rags. But good thing, I guess, they were everywhere. I was so embarrassed.
How old were you?
Oh, God, I was in high school. I was probably 17, like, you know, a junior, about to be a senior, you know, right at that age that your boyfriends are more important, and your you know, your nighttime life is more important, and you don't want your parents finding your poopy rags.
So did he just leave them?
No, he picked it up, and he looked at it, and I was screaming out the truck that it was my poop to throw it down. And so then he threw it down, he got in the car, he got in the truck, and he was laughing. He always drove a 350, and so, you know, he jumped in the truck, and he started laughing, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, Dad, I had to go poop. In hindsight, I guess he was just used to looking for his rags, and used to seeing him out in the middle of the road, and curiosity got the best of all of us in that one.
Would you drop him off in the day or the night?
Always at night. I never dropped my dad off during the daylight hours, or picked him up in the daylight hours. Everything was in the wee hours of the night. Always, you know, he was not even just a hunter. My dad was an avid fisherman. I mean, we would run illegal trout lines all the time, mostly to feed the family. You know, that's how we ate a lot of times, you know, was having fresh venison or fish, you know, in the freezer. So my dad would wake me up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to run trout lines, and I would stand in water way over my head, but he'd find me the biggest rock, and he'd stand me on it, and all I kept thinking was, I sure hope I don't fall off, because it would be in the moonlight hours as well. And so as a kid, that's that's stressful, you know, that it's scary. That's a scare. I couldn't imagine throwing my daughter, you know, and putting her out there in the middle of the bay in the middle of the night, and I couldn't see his head anymore, and I would always just look for his head. That was my telltale sign of, where's Dad?
How tall was your father?
Lower end of 6 foot range, not in the upper end, but tall enough that whenever you're a kid, you're like, oh, he's a giant. His stride was very long, and so it took about 5 of my steps to keep up with one of his steps. He had the longest stride.
Do you remember your first encounter with Charlie Beaty?
I call him Crazy Charlie. That's what we knew him as growing up, because him and my dad would get together, and my dad would drink his Budweisers, and Charlie would come over, and it'd be hours of sitting in the living room and telling stories, and they would both amp each other up. And so Charlie was actually just more of an extension of our family. And so I don't remember meeting him for the first time, because he was just always there, especially during hunting season. You know, when it was fishing season, we'd see him periodically, but I believe my dad met Charlie, though, when Charlie was a taxidermist at Hibbler's Taxidermy, which was probably the most popular local taxidermy shop there. And that's how they initially met. Charlie knew the Kenedy Ranch really well, and my dad knew several of the other local ranches really well, and that's kind of how they hit it off and started teaching each other the lay of the land.
Why would y'all call him Crazy Charlie?
Well, Charlie would stay out in the woods for, you know, a week, 2 weeks, sometimes 20 days, you know, somewhere up in that, you know, and he wouldn't even pack food or enough food most of the time, and he would just eat whatever he shot or rely on, you know, some of his kills. And so Charlie is just one of the best storytellers, and I remember that growing up. It was always so animated, and you know, you were just captivated in some of the things, you know, in his stories. And again, my dad was not. He was a man of a few words, you know, but you know, had really good stories whenever it got hot or it got close. You know, the authorities were close, game wardens were close, and so they would just sit there and tell stories back and forth all the time about almost getting caught.
Is there a story that your dad used to tell or that you heard about him that's maybe sticks out?
Oh gosh, I think my dad was very proud whenever my mom shot her first deer. And so I think that's a pretty crazy story just because it was a date night for them. They went to the Sandy Six Pack band, which was a popular local band in the area. And of course they had some beverages and getting their tipsy on. And my dad convinced my mom to go poaching on the King Ranch at that time. And so they were double dating, and so they ended up talking to Randy Wright, who decided he was going to go drop them off. And my mom, she was wearing, we have a picture of this day, so I remember what she was wearing, and I probably was 4 years old in the picture. And so she's wearing a concert t-shirt. I think it said Ronnie Millsap on it, and it has a lot of white and black, and she's in her Wranglers, her little bell bottoms, and they go poaching overnight, and that's what she wore. And I asked her, I said, well, did you have a camo jacket? Did you have anything? No. Your dad said, I got this, you're going to be fine, just chill out, we're going to get you a deer. And so it was the one and only deer that my mom ever shot. And came on, like I said, came off the King Ranch, and it was kind of a similar story where she shot it early during the day, and then they didn't really have much to do, and they were kind of waiting for their ride. My dad ended up shooting a 400-pound boar that he wanted to come back later and pick up, and my mom got super nervous, but that's just her personality. My mom, has that nervous energy of like, oh my God, we're going to get caught, and my dad's like, laid back, it's okay, like we're not going to get caught, it's okay. And so, I thought that was a pretty crazy story just because I couldn't believe that they left a concert and went poaching on the King Ranch, and then she left with a deer, which stayed mounted on our wall forever. And but yeah, I got a picture of the deer caped out, and I'm about 4 years old sitting in the picture. I think she shot it in 1983 after their date night. But he was very proud of that, and knowing my mom today, that's a pretty crazy.
And so they were at the concert, and they just started talking about maybe hunting, and then just decided to leave and go poaching?
Yeah. They just said, hey, let's go shoot a deer on the King Ranch. We've had enough beers, we've had a good time tonight, now what's next? Yeah. Most of us are like, maybe we'll go to after hours bar or, go home, but no.
Yeah. So Beaty would camp out on these ranches. Your father's style was a little different. He would more get dropped off for the night. He would only stay for a night? Or?
Oh, no, he would. My dad would camp out on the ranches. He would stay out there for a week at a time. Never in the 20-day mark that I can remember. Charlie might know a little bit better how long he stayed out there, but yeah, he would stay for a week at a time. And Christmas didn't matter. My dad worked rotation, and so my dad was only home 6 months out of the year. We only saw him 6 months out of the year since he was off, working on drilling rigs all the time, and mostly overseas. So sometimes he was, 30 days on and 21 days off. And if it was hunting season, we didn't see him for those 21 days off, maybe for the first week. And if it fell over Christmas and the weather was good, my dad said Christmas was the best time to hunt because all those game wardens were with their families and nobody was paying attention to the ranches. And so his favorite time was Christmas Eve and Christmas Day.
When you were dropping him off, how would he get out of the car without you hitting the brakes?
Well, I have to hit the brakes, I'd turn my lights off. I had to hit the brakes to, to be able to drop him off, but it'd have to be like real fast. He was just ready to jump out of the car.
What were y'all doing down in Ecuador?
Yeah, my dad, he was in oil and gas, and so he was working on some drilling rigs in the jungle there, and so my family and I lived in Quito, Ecuador, while my dad was working, and so we lived as expats there for about 2 years, and then would just visit family in the U.S. During that time. But his poaching didn't really stop. I mean, he didn't shoot big deer, but I remember, he was all about catching the biggest piranha in the Amazon and all about catching the biggest boa constrictor, and he came home with a 16-foot, no, I think it was 20 feet. He came home with about a 20-foot long boa constrictor that he ran over with the company vehicle, got out, wrestled it. It was stunned and was driving back to the rig camp Well, the boa constrictor started to come alive and started to wrap around him and squeeze him, and it was cutting off his circulation, and he couldn't breathe hardly by the time he got back to the rig. So he jumps out and he's hollering, trying to get somebody to come and help him. And so he ended up having the local Indians ended up skinning it for him and tanning the hide, and he came home with the skin of that boa constrictor and loved to tell the story about how it almost killed him.
When did you start to understand that your dad was a known name around town?
Oh God, I didn't understand, the level of, well, one, that my dad's name was known around town, and the level of poaching that he did until I was later in high school, probably about to graduate high school, maybe around my senior year. I mentioned earlier, I thought that having a hunting and fishing license was more of a suggestion and not a requirement. I thought that we just donated money to Texas Parks and Wildlife for fun, to be good people. And so I didn't know that it was a requirement to actually carry a license. And so, I think in those high school years, that's about the time that cell phones came out. I don't know if you remember the cell phone that was mounted on the bottom of the truck floor, not in the bag, but there was actual one mounted there, and he had one, and it would honk the horn of his 350, and it would be so annoying when that thing rang. And, he got real particular about us talking about hunts, on the phone, whether it was a landline or a cell line, but especially a cell line. We weren't allowed to talk about any kind of hunting or where he was at or his whereabouts. And so it was at that time when cell phones came out that I really started to scratch my head that, well, maybe this is a bigger deal, than us just filling the freezer. And why are we hiding from the law? And why am I not allowed to talk about where he is when he's on his days off? That became more of an issue at that time.
Do you recall any funny stories about your father, George? It can do with hunting or not.
I remember my dad would catch baby fawns or doe, and he'd bring them to friends. And so he had such a big thing about catching baby fawns and giving them to people so they could raise them. And I remember we were taking a deer. He had this Cutlass Supreme. It was like a old school sedan car that we were in. And he always let us stop at Sonic, so we stopped at Sonic, we got a milkshake, and, the Fawn was in the back seat with me. Well, the Fawn started to kicking, and it was shitting at the same time. And I was like, oh no, the Fawn's shitting in the car, it's kicking, I'm crying, I'm screaming in the back seat, My dad's like, calm the Fawn down. Well, my milkshake goes everywhere, and it was just a cluster. And so he ended up pulling over and, trying to calm the situation. But in hindsight, you turn around and you laugh about that, being like, what were we doing? Carrying a fawn, in the car and taking it and delivering it to people, but yeah, he would do that often, rescue these animals or show up at the house with the biggest blue indigo that you've ever seen in your life, just so he could show us that he caught this, blue indigo. It eats rattlesnakes, and then he'd let it go. He never killed those animals, and he was actually very particular about even when I got a BB gun, I wasn't allowed to kill anything but a dove. And if I killed anything outside of that, I was going to be in big trouble. Well, my dad was away working on a rig, and there was a cardinal that was like way in the distance on the top of the tree line. And I thought, I want to see if I could hit it. And so sure enough, I shot it and it died. And I'm freaking out thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? My dad, but luckily he wasn't home, right? And so I took the Cardinal, I went to the edge of the brush and I buried it as deep as I could, for being a little kid, right? And my dad was coming home from the rig in like 2 days. And so I'd go over there, I put some rocks on top of it, just hoping that he wouldn't notice that there was fresh dirt that had been dug up. Well, lo and behold, our lab goes and digs that damn Cardinal up and brings it to the front door. And Dad saw that I had a BB hole in it. And so he immediately came to me. And not only did he take my gun, he threw my gun away in the trash and then told me I wasn't allowed to shoot anymore at that time. But ironically, you would think that my dad was the first person to take me hunting, but my dad was gone so much that you may have heard Charlie talk about Dennis Music, who Dennis Music was also another permanent fixture around our household. Dennis would trap a lot of turtles, and so he had a lot of turtle trapping stories, which I was fascinated with as a kid. But my dad, even though he bought me my first shotgun, Dennis Music was the one that actually took me hunting for the first time.
Do you remember that story with Dennis Music?
Yeah, it was poaching in a park, Clayburgh Park in Keensville, and so we had this park that had this creek waterway that went through it, and not a lot of people went and hung out at this park. They'd hang out, by the swing sets and things like that, but not really by the creek bottom because there wasn't very good access, and so that's where Dennis Music took me hunting for the first time, was in a public park. It was during the day, actually.
Did you get anything?
I got a bird. I can't tell you what kind of bird I got, but I was able to shoot a bird. And if it wasn't a dove, I'm sure we didn't tell my dad about it.
Can you tell me the story of the Scarecrow?
Yeah, it was in December that Charlie and my dad went hunting on the Kenedy Ranch, and so Charlie actually rattled up the Scarecrow, and my dad ended up shooting it on December 27th. 1979, which ironically is my birthday, December 27th, 1979. And ended up being one of the biggest deer, that he ever shot. And he was very prideful of the Scarecrow, and one of the biggest deer that he shot that came off the Kenedy Ranch, that's for sure. Not the biggest deer in today's time, for some of the other ranches he hunted later. But the Scarecrow definitely was his pride and joy. Now, I was still, obviously I wasn't born, I was just born, the day that he shot it, so I didn't get all the full stories of the nitty-gritty details about that, so Charlie has a lot of those details because he was with him whenever he shot the deer.
Did he have any boys?
Yes, I have a brother. We're 12 years apart. I remember the day that my brother was born, we all went to the hospital to see him for the first time, and my dad brought a set of deer horns. That made me emotional. But yeah, he brought a set of deer horns to the hospital. It was a sweet moment. My brother doesn't poach, but I have a picture of him showing my brother deer horns for the first time.
How'd your father pass away?
He was watching Sunday football one afternoon with my Uncle Mike, and complained a little bit about chest pains. My Uncle Mike said he stood up and was like, "Hey, do I need to call somebody?" And my dad was like, "No." And so my dad sat down, and then he just collapsed. And we were so far away from any hospital or emergency services that it took him a long time to respond anyways. And so, yeah, that's how he passed away. But there is a good story in there about his funeral and the day that he was buried. As you know, we've talked a lot about the game wardens having a bounty on him, and he was definitely the most well-known name in the area for poaching and wanting to get caught, but also a lot of people just wanted to hear the stories. And so we were at the Baptist church that morning. It was late morning. And some of my dad's friends had built these stands for some of my dad's favorite deer. And so he had a Booney Crockett there, the Scarecrow was there, and they made an absolute beautiful backdrop, for my dad's funeral at the church. Well, then right whenever the funeral services had started, a bunch of game warden trucks pulled up. And so my dad's friends thought that they were there to confiscate deer heads. And I remember a lot of chatter. I remember still being upset, but there was a lot of chatter in the church about the game wardens being there to take the deer heads. And so they weren't, though. They were actually there to ask the family if the game wardens could follow the hearse, because that was going to be the closest they were going to get to catching my father. And so it was a bittersweet, but obviously a respectful moment, that they had a lot of respect for him. And they did. It was the hearse, it was the game warden trucks, all the way to the cemetery. And Charlie had actually, Charlie was unable to attend my dad's funeral, and had a gentleman named Scott rattling up using rattling horns and sitting there rattling as all the cars were coming into the cemetery. And so Charlie did that. And once everybody got placed, and right before the actual cemetery procession services, they set the rattling horns on top of the casket, and they were buried with my dad. And my dad is buried on the fence line of the King Ranch, and he wanted to be buried there. So on the back of his tombstone, which I can share a picture with you, it says "The Outlaw." He's very happy to have his little plot on the edge of on the fence line of the King Ranch, and he looks at the deer, I'm assuming, every day.
People remember your father for poaching. Poaching aside, is there something that you most remember him by?
Yeah, my father was so good with his drive and his diligence for things. If my dad put his mind to anything, whether it was going on the next ranch without studying the map, he was going to figure it out, and he knew enough about land and stuff to do it. But he was just one of those people that if he put his mind to it, he was absolutely going to make it happen. And I think I mentioned earlier, he didn't deliver here, he always delivered here. And so I think I inherited a lot of that. I think there's a lot of good lessons learned in there. Although when you're a kid, you're like, why do I have to be so perfect? Why do I have to shoot deer in the first shot? And why can't I shoot the big gun? Why do I got to shoot the little gun? But growing up, he introduced me to a lot of that drive and diligence and determination, and I hope that's my legacy for my own daughter, is that I'm able to teach her some of those same values and respect the land and learn how to hunt. And she's 4 now, and she shot her first 308 last week, and I couldn't be any more proud.
If there's anything that you could tell your father today.
Oh. Man, that almost came with a nephew. No. I think, honestly, we have this conversation, and I'll get a little watery-eyed in this one, but we've had a few conversations ever since we opened the outdoor store that I know that he would have been the first. He would have been the first hunting and fishing license I would have sold, and just out of principle. But he would have absolutely probably been the first firearms. He probably would have bought the Weatherby, even though that was his lustful safe queen. But yep. I thought I wasn't going to cry, but tricked me. But yeah, I know that he would have been the first hunting and fishing license that we would have sold here. And he would have been really freaking proud of that. Because I think, it's come full circle, right? We do things by the book. We obviously, we sell things by the book, do things by the book now, and those are all stories. They're all a part of your life. It doesn't define who you are today and the rules you follow today, and whether or not you think that's legendary or you think it's terrible. But those are our stories, of our childhood and our growing up, and that's what makes us who we are.